Alright, so when you start off building a character, the first and foremost thing that I think most people have issues with is ultimately they have issues with kind of thinking about how they're going to build things, and they don't use reference to kind of build stuff. And so I got two pieces of reference here. This is from, I think it was PX Free, and then this anatomy one was from PX here. So, you know, these two images here are basically what I want to go for. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to just use a simple kind of hard round. I'm not going to have any major size to it. It's ultimately just kind of that, all right? And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this over for now, and I'm going to draw my character in the center here between these two. So I want to use this pose here, but I want to pay attention to the muscle structure there. So if I'm building, say, a character with muscles or whatever, and the big thing is start blocking out your basic shape. And it doesn't matter what you're doing, but get that skeleton in there first. And you can see here, I'm just kind of putting some basic building blocks in here. I'm not worrying too much about like pose or not muscles and anatomy and things like that. And so all I'm doing is I'm building out a character like so. All right, and then it's when you start building up on that character. So you know, cylinders for the neck. You know, for the torso, I'm going to use more of a ball with kind of that rib cage feel. For the hips, I'm going to use kind of a half circle here, and then I'm going to use this. And then, you know, kneecaps, and I'm using cylinders here. And so all I'm doing is building out that rough basic shape. I'm going to kind of build out calf muscles. Here I'm going to build out rough kind of muscles like so. I'm going to use cylinders here. I'm going to use a block to kind of block out that elbow. A little bit more cylinder here, so on and so forth. And so I'm just blocking out that shape. And that's ultimately where I need to start, is start off with some very simple blocks. And I'm using the basic shapes here to kind of build this up. I'm going to use kind of rough, just kind of cylinders here and so on and so forth. And then I'm going to just draw triangles for the feet, keep it simple, and maybe this one is going to be a little bit over like so, but again, simple shapes. Maybe make the head a little bit bigger. And you can always test this out, what you're doing. You can always test this out via like measuring heads, and that's a simple thing to do, especially if you're doing digital. If you're doing traditional, just measure it. But I'm going to copy this layer here, and I'm going to simply drag this down, and you can see that I've got my head proportions like so. And this is kind of that heuristic proportions here. But the heads work, okay? And you can see that. It makes sense. I'm going to just grab all these, and I'm going to trash can them. I don't need it, but it's just a good measuring tool for what I'm doing. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with the second layer, okay? So I'm going to minimize this so I can see just a little bit of it. And then here, I'm going to use the anatomy, okay? This is part of the anatomy, but I'm going to also see my muscle structure and so on and so forth here. All right. So now with this in place, with this framework in place, I can start building out things that actually make more sense. And so an example of this is, you know, start with simply blocking out like your basic anatomy, looking at the jawline here, and building out the shapes. So this is where you start refining your work. And you can see here that I'm just kind of basically putting in the muscles of this character behind it. Okay? And I'm not really worried too much about being, 100% perfect. I'm worried more about, kind of that idea of, this is how the anatomy fits. And so you can see here, just as I flow and start putting in some of the anatomy, I'm going to get a little bit more of that kind of look and feel. And so you're going to build up the anatomy of your character. You can definitely see where, just cleaning up certain lines. And I'm using the anatomy here on this to kind of really comprehend where things are going. I'm building out little building blocks here, putting in hard angles where I need to, and so on and so forth. Here is I'm building a little bit more musculature up here than normal, and so I'm just kind of blocking out more of a superhero style body and getting that kind of in aspect of what I'm trying to kind of portray here. And then, I can start building out, so you can see the hips are flaring out because they're a little bit more female. And I'm coming the hips down and draw through things. So like if I'm drawing the hips and I'm not worried about the hands, don't worry about erasing later to draw through things. And so you can see here that if I kind of block that out, if I put a little bit more in there, I'm just kind of fleshing out the overall kind of feel to this character from an anatomical standpoint. Okay? And this is just all I'm doing is ultimately looking at what I have between the two images. And I'm going to go here, bring this here. I'm going to accentuate the ankle a little bit more. Kind of put like so. This is my kneecap here. I'm bringing this out a little bit more like this. Bringing that in. And then again, pushing out the kneecaps. And it's just a matter of going through, and I don't have to draw the toes if I'm not going to worry about the toes, but it's just a matter of going through and kind of building out what I need. And use the reference as much as possible. Like here, zoom up on your hands and look at your hands so you can see how they kind of lay on the figure themselves. And so all I'm doing is I'm just blocking out basic shapes, and just kind of blocking out those basic shapes like so to get the overall look and feel. And they don't have to be perfect at this point. I'm just worried about getting kind of that basic kind of feeling on there. All right? And you can see the hands are a little bit too big. That's okay. I can scale them down, change them up a little bit digitally. Here I'm going to start blocking in a little bit more of the eyes, or the face. So I'm just kind of roughing out kind of my base idea here. Putting in my base idea of the nose and putting in the base idea of the mouth. Just kind of adding in location. And so on and so forth. And so you can see that, I'm very simply kind of blocking out my basic shapes. Okay? And so once that's done, it's down to the refining stage. Okay? It's down to the costuming stage. It's down to the overall kind of look and feel that you want to have when you're doing this. So if I'm building another character, if I'm building a character and say, a cyborg or something along those lines, this now gets basically lowered down again just to give me a rough idea, and then here I'm starting to build on top of it. So this is where I need to add the cyborg part of my components. And when you think about this, don't think about it as, oh, hey, a lot of people just go, oh, look, cyborg, got parts, done. And that's not the way to do things. You want to look at what's out there. You want to look at your designs. You want to look at kind of that rough idea of, what you're building. And so if I were to build a cyborg, I would think about, okay, now I need to connect. Maybe I have a hinge here. I'm going to have some sort of I have to have that forward and backward movement. I've got to have, connections here and here, like so. I'm going to add in maybe this is some type of piston or hydraulic or something like that, and start building out what you think this futuristic version of the cyborg will be. And so, pistons, maybe you've got something going on the inside here. Just detail that out. Really think about how you're drawing this forward. Maybe this has got two pistons here, like so. And then go back to the C-3PO or something along those lines. Maybe it spins here, so it's got some hydraulics. Or maybe it's just on a pedestal here, and you get to see it spin around and rotate it and things like that. Or maybe there's something clear going on. But really sit down and think about how this is connected, what makes it work. And that functionality will kind of carry through as I build. And it doesn't always have to, it doesn't always have to be that way where you see exactly what you're seeing. So many people take this cyborg and say, oh, well, they've got to have their sleeve cut off. But why? Is it part of that character? Is that character going to go buy a shirt and cut off the sleeve just so she can show off her cybernetics? No, probably not. So, you think about this from the standpoint of design and kind of implementation of that character. That is really kind of all the bits and pieces that you need to have. Maybe she's a mechanic. And so the first thing I think of as a mechanic is they wear the army wife beater kind of t-shirt. And so here, now that starts going in, and I erase some of this up here, and it starts building up a little bit more, and I can have so on and so forth. And so ultimately what you're doing is you're building up that character. You're building that character to basically kind of create that ultimate look and feel of that character. So now, if I've got this cybernetic character and it looks and feels much more robotic, maybe that is more of my character. Look at an old mechanic. They've got usually worn boots coming up here. Usually they're higher. The heels come down and so on and so forth. So, look at my reference for boots. And, so here I can start seeing, we're just going to add those crisscrosses and the rims up here and the shoes like so, and then maybe the leather and maybe this padded here that comes around like so. So now that boot is, basically it holds that boot. And then I put some pants up there, kind of look at the wrinkles, look at how pants would fall. Maybe it's kind of flip-flopped over the boot. And so all of that makes a huge difference. How people dress, what that person, wears, basically builds up your concept. And so these are all things that you need to think about when you're designing your character. Build it up from the ground up. Start off with the basic shapes, skeleton and basic shapes. Then build up the anatomy, and then from the anatomy, start building your character. All right?